Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Jennifer Duke. There's a new analysis that paints a pretty grim picture of retirement for Australian women. How Australia Retires is a study by Vanguard, one of the world's largest global investment management companies. It has more than $12 trillion in assets under management globally. And it found that compared to men, women face significant challenges in the lead up to retirement. This includes differences in their home ownership rates, personal super balances, their own investments, annual income, and just their overall confidence levels. So I wanted to take a closer look at some of this research and get an idea of what might be needed to change the situation. Shannon Nutter is the head of Vanguard Super. Shannon, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So I wanted to have a look at the financial circumstances of women before they retire, first of all, just in those numbers. So a third of working age women reported a super balance of less than $20,000, and that was versus about 12% of men in the same category. That's a pretty confronting statistic, isn't it?
It is. And what we've seen is that women are just not on equal footing when it comes to retirement, right? They earn about 13% less than their male counterparts. And they often work in lower wage industries, take time off to handle home issues such as kids or parents, and they live longer, which, okay, is great for us. However, it means we actually need more in retirement. So it's a bit of a challenge.
So at the other end of the spectrum, there's about 60% of men who have a balance in their superannuation of over $100,000, which is more than double the proportion of women on your research. What are some of the reasons why that gap is just so giant? You mentioned childcare is obviously one of them.
Right, and the wages, the roles that women actually have when they work. But I think it goes beyond that too. I think it also relates to confidence and it relates to planning. So if we talk about confidence, well, men just simply have more of it. They're more confident about financial decision making. So we saw that 50% of men in the survey said they were very or extremely confident making decisions related to managing their finances. And only about a third of women said the same. So That's a significant difference. And if we look at the confidence, right, that extends across products. It extends across confidence in understanding things like shares and bonds and superannuation. And so all of those things add up in terms of likelihood to invest, likelihood to potentially invest in something that is well suited to you, well diversified. And so one thing that women might want to think about in terms of an action is how they can move the needle for themselves just a little bit to become more comfortable on these topics. Not necessarily become experts, right? Nobody has to become an expert, but start advancing their knowledge in some way.
And what sort of things should they do to be able to do that? Is that a simple case of kind of Googling and figuring it out, or where do they start?
It could be. I mean, it could be a call to their superannuation to talk about products. Most providers have basic information about their products and services, certainly on their website. And hopefully those are explained in an easy to understand way so that folks can make sense of it. And beyond that, I'd say, there's certainly investing blogs. There are groups for women in particular to talk about finance in ways that feel comfortable to them. And there may be women who have friends who are good at this. So maybe just talk about it to some of your friends. Maybe there's somebody in your core group that actually knows something about these things, does it well, and is willing to share that knowledge. So I think there's a range of actions women can take and places that hopefully feel comfortable for them to go and expand their knowledge.
I think that's a great idea. And obviously there are things clearly then that women can do themselves. Is there something that you think the government might want to do in terms of closing this gap?
Well, I think certainly we would support the government paying super on paid parental leave. We know that women retire with 25 to 35% less super than men. And there's rising rates of poverty and homelessness among older women. And so that isn't great. So if we could do anything to close that gap on super balances, that would be a good start.
Stay with me, Shannon. We'll be back in a minute. I'm talking to Shannon Nutter, the head of Vanguard Super. And what about women's expectations? Because I think the research showed that women want to retire earlier than men, but expect that they'll actually end up working even longer.
Yes, and that is the case. Women would like to retire at about age 62, but they expect to retire when they're about 66. And that number even extends if you think about single women, right, who aren't part of a partnered family. So, I think what we have to think about there is, if that's the case, right, we know that's what the data says. How do women start planning earlier? How do they start putting some real thought to, I'm going to retire at some point down the track. What do I need to do today to get myself ready and to feel confident? What we saw in the survey was that almost half of women surveyed, 46%, said they had no plan or did not know what they needed for retirement.
That's crazy.
It is such a high number. And the opposite is true for men, right? 73% of men said, hey, I've got a general plan, a good plan, or I know exactly what I'm going to need for retirement. And so without that plan, even a basic one, right? It could be with a financial advisor, or it could just be sitting down or using the tools available from your superannuation or another financial provider to say, when do I think I want to retire? What do I have today? How do I expect that's going to grow over time? What might that look like when I'm of retirement age? What might that translate to in terms of a retirement income? And what can I do to boost that number? And, it might be as simple as finding some extra discretionary dollars in your budget to start making voluntary contributions, because we know that women are far less likely to make voluntary contributions to their super than men.
And I'm very curious around this financial advice sector, because just reflecting on my own personal friendship group, a lot of my male friends all go to financial planners. Hardly any of my female friends do at all. I find that difference really, really stark. And you can actually get financial planning funded through your super. I think that's correct. What do you think needs to be done to kind of encourage women to be, and I know you're saying there's a confidence gap here, but how do we get them confident enough to go and sit down in front of a financial advisor? Like, what do you think we need to do to push them along?
Well, I would hope some of the data makes women feel a little more comfortable maybe going and asking for help. The data would suggest that those who have a plan, whether they created it themselves or whether they worked with a financial advisor, are 6 times more confident than those without a plan. And so sit down, assess your finances, see what you're earning, see what you're spending, see what you could potentially put towards retirement and feel comfortable doing so. Even starting there is a step forward. Take some action. We know that taking action makes you feel more confident, more in control. So start doing that. And then you could say, okay, now I've pulled my things together. My information is here. Let me go talk to somebody. Because I do think sometimes there's a bit of a fear, and I think this is just human nature, of if I go talk to someone who is knowledgeable, they'll see that I'm not knowledgeable.
I feel like that every time I do an interview with an expert on the podcast. So it's a relatable feeling, people.
Right. That notion of, I don't want to feel dumb.
Yeah.
And I think there is a history to a certain extent of, in different industries, of people making women feel a little less.
Yes.
And so, I think a lot of that has changed over time, but being able to go and say, look, this is what I don't know. That's okay. That they're an expert. They're supposed to be there to help you. So I think that if that's a concern for people, they just need to hopefully let that go and just go in and have a conversation.
Definitely. And I also want to ask about what role businesses can play here, because there will be a lot of businesses who are listening who will be wondering how they can help their female staff members, and particularly those who are potentially returning from career breaks, such as for childcare. Do you have any tips for how they can maybe educate or help their teams?
Well, I think there's a few things that businesses could do to help employees. I know at Vanguard, we pay super unpaid parental leave. So companies could certainly be proactive in that area. And I think the onus isn't just on women to be proactive. What can employers do, such as offering free childcare, paying for super? We already talked about that. But things that allow women to get back to work and continue contributing. Now, you know, we also could have better experiences, better communications, things that work for women, frankly, and help them get engaged, provide real insight. So I think the industry as a whole sometimes has just dumped information on people. Just lots and lots of information. Go sift through it yourself. Go figure out what you need to do. And the reality is most of us don't do that. We don't have the time to do it. We don't necessarily have the interest to do it. And so the more that financial institutions like Vanguard and others can break down that information into really insightful pieces and help give guidance about what to do next to improve your retirement outcomes, that's going to be great for everyone.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I'm hoping there's lots of women listening as well who are going to go and do something about their super balances now. Look, Shannon, thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And that was Shannon Nutter, the head of Vanguard Super. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Jennifer Duke, economics correspondent for Capital Brief and filling in for Sean Elmer. Have a great day.